start with the.
I'd be pleased to do that.
Yes.
I'm happy to introduce Chenyang, who many of you do know personally. He's been working on his PhD in our department here for a few years, and I'm really pleased to see him take this opportunity to defend his thesis and potentially earn his PhD. The presentation that will preface his examination will be delivered publicly, and we'll afford the public to ask a few questions after. Then we'll ask the public to leave. And the presentation itself really revolves around lithofacies characteristics and their influence on reservoir behavior in low permeability rocks of the Montney member in northeastern British Columbia and northwestern Alberta. So Chenyang, I think you can take it from there.
Okay, so it's time to give the presentation, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, dear professors and dear audience, thank you for attending my defense today. My dissertation is associated with lithofacies characteristics, reservoir properties, and the ecology of the upper Montney member. There are 6 chapters in this thesis. First, let us have a general overview of the Montney formation and my target, the upper Montney member. The lower Triassic Montney formation is in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin across northeastern British Columbia and west central Alberta. 5 basin scale unconformities are identified to separate the Montney formation into 3 subdivisions. From the bottom to top is lower, middle, and upper Montney members. And the upper Montney member unconformably overlies the middle Montney member and sharply overlies by the Sunside Prairie Formation or the Doik Phosphate Zone. So far, there are a lot of research, abundant, valuable work have been done on the Montney formation, but mostly focus on the middle and the lower Montney members. For example, the comprehensive sedimentological and iconological research on the Montney formation in the Pedigree Ring Border Cantor River area by Dr. Zuneveld. So far, there are very few published studies on the upper Montney member, especially on the detailed reservoir characterization or analysis of the iconology. So this dissertation will provide you an insight into the lithofacies characteristics, the reservoir characterization, and the iconology of the upper Montney member. Here are the methods I'm used in this dissertation. I will introduce each of them in the following presentation. 5 wells were logged for this thesis. Chapter 2 mainly focused on the lithofacies dependent reservoir properties in the shore face Montney successions. The study area is the Puquasqua field located in the west central Alberta. 2 studied wells are shown in the map. Lithofacies are divided on basis of sedimentological and iconological information. Totally 4 facies are identified. The lithofacies 1 is characterized by the highest amount of bituminous finer siltstone units. It is mostly composed of wavy parallel laminated to lenticular bedded bituminous fine to coarse grained siltstone. It bears noting that there are thin, intensely biortubated, phycosiphon dominated beds within these lithofacies. It is interpreted these lithofacies represent the offshore transition deposition. Lithofacies 2 shows a remarkable decrease in the bituminous finer siltstone units, mainly include Hamerky cross-stratified dolomitic medium coarse-grained siltstone interbedded with bituminous fine to medium grained siltstone. Similar at lithofacies 1, there is also such thin phycosiphon dominated intensely biortubated beds in lithofacies 1. Lithophase 2 is interpreted to represent the deposition within the lower shore face. Lithophase 3 has very few bituminous finer siltstone units. It's mostly composed of wavy parallel laminated to low angle cross stratified dolomitic medium to coarse grained siltstone. Lithophase 3 is characterized by the porosity of the trace force assemblages, and it is interpreted that lithophase 3 represents the middle shore face deposition. Lithophase 4 includes intensely belt-weighted dolomitic coarse-grained siltstone to very fine-grained sandstone. Possibly because of the very intense beltivation, most physical sedimentary structures are indiscernible, and this lithophase is interpreted to represent the deposition within the upper shore face or foreshore. Here are the two strip logs of these two wells. As we can see here are the litho logs for these two wells and the distributions of these four lithophases and their corresponding well logging features. In order to investigate the mineralogy, the grain size, the proportion, and the origin of clay minerals and pore features, high resolution thin section and SCM photographs were taken. Taking the lithophase 1 as an example, the pore spaces and the interconnectivity of pore throats were significantly reduced because of the texturally immature lithology and abundant orthogenic elite clay minerals and pyrite framboise replacement and abundant dolomite cement. In addition, the compaction is inferred to play a negative role in the reduction of porosity. So the reservoir quality of the lithophase 1 is inferred to be poor to fair. On basis of the similar analysis, the reservoir quality of lithophase 2 is fair to good, while lithophase 3 has a good reservoir quality, and the reservoir quality of lithophase 4 is poor. As we know, for the conventional reservoirs, the Wendland's equation is a practical way to evaluate the pore throat radius. So with the measured porosity permeability values, pore throat radius associate different lithophases were evaluated through Wendland's equation. These histograms shows the distribution of the porosity, permeability, and the pore throat radius. And it is obvious the lithophase 3 had the better reservoir properties than lithophase 2 than lithophase 1. Similar trending is also shown in these two Wendland porosity permeability plots. As we can see here, the lithophase 3 has higher porosity, permeability, and pore throat radius than the lithophase 2, lithophase 1, then lithophase 4. And these two plots also show that the distributions of the reservoir properties are lithophase dependent. This relationship of lithophase to reservoir quality is the result of hydraulic sorting or winnowing proportional to sedimentary energies inherent in those some environments. And this does evidence the validity of the detailed facies analysis in the context of the reservoir analysis. However, this does not mean each lithophase has entirely predictable reservoir character. For example, in both plots, the lithophase 1 and 2 overlap significantly. A brief conclusion. The Montney formation in Pukaspa field is interpreted to represent the deposition within a storm-dominated Silicic classic shelf. Four faces comprise a conformable showing upwards shore face sequence, and according to high resolution and detailed reservoir analysis, lithophase 3 exhibits the best reservoir quality, and the Wendland plots show distribution of reservoir properties are lithophase dependent. Chapter 3 will focus on the lithophase characteristics and the reservoir properties of the offshore Montney successions. The study well is in the Shell Montney field located in the northeastern British Columbia. This strip log also shows the lithal logs and the distributions of the lithal facies and corresponding gamma ray features. 3 lithal facies have been divided. Firstly, I want to highlight these 3 lithal facies are common in the absence of trace fossils. Lithal facies 1 is characterized by wavy parallel to planar laminated bituminous fine to medium grained siltstone. As there are still evidence of weak influence of storm waves and the presence of a harmonic cross stratification, the lithal facies 1 is interpreted to represent the upper ramp deposition corresponding to the offshore transition. In addition to the absence of trace fossils, there are no wave-generated structures in lithal facies 2 and 3. So it is interpreted the lithal facies 2 and 3 represent the deposition below the storm wave base. However, the lithal facies 2 has much thinner such dolomitic coastal siltstone units. So it is interpreted the lithal facies 2 represents the deposition from the low density turbidity currents within the distal lower ramp, corresponding to offshore, but distal to the site of mass wasting. In contrast, the lithal facies 3 has much higher amount of these coastal siltstone units. So the lithal facies 3 is inferred to represent the deposition from the low density turbidity currents within the proximal lower ramp corresponding to offshore, but proximal to the site of mass wasting. This table is a summary shows the porosity, permeability, and the TOC values of 3 lithal facies. As we can see, these 3 lithal facies have very similar porosity and permeability values. But overall, reservoir quality of the Montney formation in the studied well is inferred to be poor because of the very low permeability values. According to the XRD dataset and the ternary diagram, the 3 lithal facies are also very similar in lithology, showing very low abundance of clay minerals. High resolution SEM photographs also show the poor reservoir quality. Primary porosities are significantly reduced, and the pore types mainly include intergranular, intragranular, and intercrystalline pore spaces. And the factors destroying reservoir quality mainly include the pyrite framboise replacement, quartz overgrowth, and foreign dolomite cement, and orthogenic elite coatings. Here's a lot, and the compaction. However, there are few secondary pores possibly associated with the dissolution of the dolomite, the feldspar, and the halite, may contributing to the reservoir quality. The poor reservoir quality is also shown by the thin section photographs. It is obvious the spaces between grains of this Montney formation is pervasively filled by the black to brown bitumen. However, so far, the solid bitumen within the siltstone units of the Montney formation is still debatable. While the correlation between the TOC, clay minerals, pyrite, main detrital minerals, and porosity reveal that solid bitumen in the Montney formation in this studied course is possibly mostly converted from the kerogen deposited in situ. So the reservoir nature of this Montney formation in the studied area is possibly a self-sourcing reservoir system. So the 3 facies reveals the Montney formation in study area represent the deposition within a predominantly silicic-clastic ramp setting, ranging from offshore transition to offshore settings. 3 lethal fishes are similar in lithology and reservoir quality, and the solid bitumen is inferred to be sourced from organic matter accumulated in situ. The chapter 4 and chapter 5 will discuss the ichnology in different areas. First, let us have a look at the ichnology of Upper Montney in the West Central Alberta. The study area to study the course and the lithologs, the distributions of the lethal fishes are seen at the chapter 2. In order to investigate ichnological characteristics, the cores are logged in detail to determine the ichnogenesis and their sedimentological context. Other ichnological data recorded and used in this study mainly include bioturbation index, bioturbation diversities, maximum borrow diameters, and size diversity index. From lethal fishes 1 to fishes 4, the distal lower shore face, proximal lower shore face, middle shore face, upper shore face, or foreshore comprise a conformable coursing upwards shore face sequence. Since the tempestite accounts for a substantial proportion of this shore face deposition, so the Upper Montney in the study area represent the deposition within the moderately to strongly storm-dominated shore face settings. Under this environmental background, the overall bioturbation diversity and intensities are quite low, and the trace fossils are diminutive. While in fishes 1 and 2, corresponding to lower shore face, there are thin and rare intensely bioturbated beds show higher SDI and BI. As I mentioned before, the trace fossils are dominated by phycosiphon. Fishes 3, the middle shore face, is characterized by impoverished trace fossil assemblages with scarce and diminutive scoliosis and planolites identified. This table is a summary, is the attribute of the ichnogenesis, mainly including phycosiphon, tachycners, cylindricners, scoliosis, planolites of the Upper Montney in the West Central Alberta. On basis of the sedimentological and ichnological analysis, the primary environmental stresses influencing these storm-dominated shore face settings mainly include persistent and powerful hydraulic conditions, high sedimentation rates, and lowered level of oxygen. For the thin phycosiphon dominated intensely bioturbated beds in the lower shore face, fishes 1, fishes 2, right? This corresponds to figure photo A, B, C, and E. Those are those thin beds, but with high bioturbation. These beds may record episodically favorable conditions contributing to organism colonization during or shortly after storms. A brief conclusion. The deposition of the Montney Formation in this study area may happen within moderately to strongly storm-dominated shore face settings. And under this environmental background, the overall bioturbation diversity and intensity are low, and the trace fossils are small in size. And the key environmental stresses mainly include the strong hydraulic conditions, high sedimentation rates, and oxygen deficiency. And those rare phycosiphon dominated intensely bioturbated beds reflect there are episodically favorable conditions, maybe during or after the storms. Chapter 5 will tell a quite different but more interesting story. It is about cryptic ichnotaxa in the Upper Montney in northeastern British Columbia. Two studied cores located in the northeastern British Columbia, very close to the Fort St. John. The lithologs and the distributions of the lethal fishes are shown in these strip logs. Totally 2 fishes are identified in 2 cores. The lethal fish 1 is mostly composed of intensely bioturbated bituminous fine to coarse-grained siltstone. The bioturbation are very common in these fishes, and there are even intervals 7 meters on average, showing homogeneously bioturbated distributions. But the bioturbation are mostly identified from the bituminous finer siltstone units. And such coarser siltstone beds showing combined flow ripples and skull surface represent the tempestites. The lithophasic one is interpreted to represent the deposition within the proximal lower shore face. Compared to the lithophasic one, the lithophasic two is characterized by a much weaker bioturbation, and the amount and the thickness of the tempestites became much lower. So it is interpreted the lithophasic two represents the deposition within the distal lower shore face. As the shore face deposition in both cores are dominated by bituminous fine-grained siltstone units, representing the fair weather deposition. So the upper Montney in this study area represents the deposition within the fair weather dominated shore face settings. When working on the ichnotaxonomy and when gathering the ichnological data, there's a big problem associated with two cores. Possibly because of a lack of grain size variability, the trace fossils observed in both cores are commonly poorly defined. So it is very difficult to identify the specific ichnospecies or ichnogenus. In this case, classifying the trace fossils into types on basis of their discernible features, for example, their morphology, their shapes, their orientations, or their internal structures, is an alternative way to work on ichnotaxonomy. So 5 types are recognized in both cores. The type A is the vertical to inclined, club-shaped, unlined burrows, usually shows top-down bioturbation, and the infillings are always structureless. The type A are commonly identified within the tempestites associated with fascias 1, and it is interpreted that type A represents a group of trace fossils attributable to distal scoliosis to proximal cruziana ichnofacies. Type B is quite similar as type A. The big difference between these two types is that type B is funnel shaped and always show tapering downwards. And also the infillings are structureless, and they are also commonly identified from tempestites associated with fascias 1. And similar as type A, the type B is also interpreted to represent a group of trace fossils attributable to distal scoliosis to proximal cruziana ichnofacies. Type C is different. They are always circular to elliptical burrows, and this group of trace fossils are usually truncated, as we can see here, and the infill is occasionally meandering or minuscule. The distribution of type C is different from the type A and type B. They are always commonly identified from the thick bituminous finer siltstone units representing the fair weather deposition, and mostly identified from fascias 1. And it is interpreted that type C represents a group of trace fossils attributable to cruziana ichnofacies. The type D is elongate, subhorizontal to horizontal, unlined burrows, and there are minuscule but vague or indistinct. Possibly because of the intense bioturbation, the type D are only identified with very intensely bioturbated beds of fascia 1. And it is interpreted that type D is represent a group of trace fossils attributable to Chrysanthemum echinophases. The type E is characterized by diminutive, circular, elliptical to irregular dots. And there are big contrast between the infillings and the host sediments. And in both photos, as we can see, the type E reborrows other trace fossils. The amount of this type of trace fossils are very low, and they are sporadically distributed in both fascia 1 and fascia 2, and they are always identified individually or in cluster. These planolitis-like trace fossils may be interpreted as feeding borrows of deposit feeders. All the ichnological data sets, including bioturbation index, size diversity index, and the borrow diameters, are collected, gathered on basis of these 5 types. So under these fair weather dominated shoreface settings, the overall bioturbation diversity and intensity are high, especially for the fascia 1. The fascia 1 exhibits the higher SDI and BI. And as I mentioned before, there are even some intervals showing homogeneously distributed bioturbation. So it implies there was a lowered environmental stress during the deposition of fascia 1. The SDI and the BI decreased gradually from the lethal fascia 1 to fascia 2. And the fascia 2 are characterized by sporadic distribution of trace fossils with very low BI and SDI. The environmental stress influencing the deposition of fascia 2 is inferred to be anoxic conditions, and this implies in basin locally, oxygen level of distal shoreface settings has not been fully recovered from the anoxic conditions because of the end-Permian mass extinction. Finally, I would like to have a summary of these ichnofossil types mentioned in this study. The ichnofossil types in this study are a practical and useful way to do the ichnotaxonomy, especially when the trace fossils are poorly defined in cores. Firstly, because these types represent a group of biogenic sedimentary structures that share ecological affinities. Secondly, the ichnological data set, BI, SDI, can be still gathered, collected from the types to interpret the physical chemical stresses in sedimentary environments. Last, these types can potentially be fitted into ichnofacies and ichnofabric concepts. So this is a very practical way to do the ichnotaxonomy. At last, I think this is a very good occasion to express my gratitude. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to my supervisor, Dr. Gingras. 2 weeks ago, my parents asked me what's my most impressive experience or things during my past 4 more years. I told my parents, having Dr. Murray Gingras as my supervisor, not only the most impressive experience for the past, but will have a very profound influence in my future. I believe this. Second, I would like to thank Dr. Zuneveld for all those detailed and valuable suggestions on my paper. Besides, I never mentioned to Dr. Zuneveld, as a Montney guy, all my confusions, all my questions associated with Montney formation can be resolved through reading your publications. It's really helpful and really great and time consuming. In addition, I would like to thank Dr. Shinley, Dr. Bannick, Dr. Bin, Dr. Octavian, and Dr. Jeffrey for your very helpful comments on my paper and research during the past 4 more years. And I would like to send my special thank you to Dr. Harris for your generous support on the Montney course and SIN sections. Without you and Stephanie, I may not make friends with offshore Montney formation. In addition, I would like to thank my excellent friend, Scott Melnick. Thank you for your tremendous support on my research, and more importantly, thank you for having patience to deeply chat with me on various topics. You know what I'm talking about. I also appreciate Chen Qi. Without your generous and kind recommendation about Dr. Gingras and IRG in 2017, my past 4 more years may be very different. And thank you for all my friends of IRG. I will remember the hours I shared with you in the lab or the office forever. Last but not least, I would like to show my great respect to Dr. Pemberton. On one hand, it's a very special experience to have a debate during the geological course. And it is my great honor to have the opportunity to take the Dr. Pemberton's course. And I think the greatest contributions Dr. Pemberton made is the founding or establishment of the IRG. Finally, I want to say what a wonderful IRG and what a wonderful journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. Congratulations, that was quite interesting. We